Hello everyone and greetings from Germany. I thought I'd record a short video about time-lapse photography. In the background you might be able to see Neuschwanstein Castle in Bavaria, and that's my subject for today. It's pouring with rain as usual. It seems I'm following the rain clouds everywhere that they might go in Europe. I do have a jacket, but I have decided that my camera is more urgent to cover with the jacket than my own head. So, first thing, if you're shooting a time lapse, then the thing that will make it interesting or not is the amount of things that are happening during the time when you're shooting the time lapse. So there needs to be some kind of action, otherwise it just looks like a still image. So here we have, on this very rainy day, we have some low light fast moving clouds which are coming back and forth in front of the castle, and I hope that they'll look somehow interesting when the time-lapse is finalized. For anyone who doesn't know what time-lapse is, then it's just basically a number of still images of the same scene captured over a longer time. And what you do is you take those images and you use those as frames of a video, and in that way you can turn half an hour into half a minute and show the changes in the scene. So in order to do this, you really want to be shooting with a tripod to keep the camera in place. There are some more advanced ways of doing this where you can on purpose have the camera moving gradually during the thing to give a more dynamic scene, but that's maybe too advanced for me anyway at the moment. This castle is in a way a special place for me. So when I was younger, I lived in Germany for a few years, when I was very young, and I visited this castle when I was about 3 years old, which was a remarkable experience. And it was, I think, 37 years until I returned a few years ago, and now I spend a couple of days in this area with the idea of trying to photograph the castle. The weather hasn't exactly cooperated, but that is the way of things. Maybe you can hear in the background the cowbells. So different locations have different kind of hazards, and here mainly you have to make sure that your tripod doesn't get knocked over by a cow. So okay, you have to adapt to the situation. From a composition point of view, I'm not sure how easy it is to see. The castle is kind of halfway up a mountainside, and from the point of view of being down on the level of the nearby village, then it's overlooking everything. So what I wanted to do with this frame is to have just mountain and castle, so reasonably tight framing, but also I wanted to have the castle at the top of the frame to kind of emphasize the fact that it's above the surrounding area. For the technical details, then using 70 to 200 lens. I think it's about 200 millimeters that I'm using. I could get closer to the castle, but the closer you get, then the more you're shooting up instead of more level, and all the lines and angles start to look wonky. So I think this is, although I'm quite far away, I decided this was the best place to shoot. I'm doing 600 frames. Settings I can't see because my jacket is covering the camera and I don't want to disturb it right now, but if I remember right, it was f11 and ISO 100, and then the shutter speed will be whatever the camera meters it to be. So I'm shooting on aperture priority for this. I want to have a even exposure for for the whole time lapse. It's also possible to shoot everything with manual, well, like fully manual exposure, but then if something changes in the weather, not that likely in this case, but if something changes in the weather during the half an hour or 40 minutes that you're shooting, then you're gonna maybe have exposure problems with that part of the time lapse. The amount of shots that I'm shooting, I think I said maybe earlier, so 600 shots. The reason I chose that was that gives me 10 seconds at 60 frames per second in the final video, or 20 seconds at 30 frames per second. Really the speed for this, different scenes seem to look better at different speeds, depending on how fast the action is here. So I think at least 600 frames gives you a choice how you want to do it when you're editing the video in a computer later. When it comes to composition, for a time lapse, you really want to make sure you have a composition that's worth something. You're not just wasting one click and 20 or 40 or 80 megabytes on your memory card. You're wasting 600 clicks and many gigabytes of data, and also 40 minutes or however many minutes. So the amount of time you waste by taking a crap picture is multiplied by 600 or whatever. The thing that you have to take into account, which is different from when you're just shooting a still image, is that you have to think what might happen and where might it happen during the time of the time lapse. So if there's a possibility that the sun breaks through the clouds or some such event, then you will want to decide at the start of the time whether you want that to be in the frame or not, and make sure that you framed the shot accordingly. When it comes to editing the time lapse, then there are some quite specialized programs for that, but I think at least to start with, and for any of the ones that I've ever done I've done so far, then Photoshop and Lightroom is a good combination. So you really don't want to edit all 600 frames individually, so that's would take ages and it would look stupid because you wouldn't manage to get it to be consistent. But if you edit the first frame or the middle frame or the last frame or whatever you think are the most exciting frames of the sequence, and then just synchronize the settings with all of the other pictures, then you should get a fairly uniform look, and any changes between frames are going to be caused by changes in the conditions, not changes in your settings. And then in Photoshop it's very easy to turn your pictures into a video. So I think first you should export them from Lightroom as JPEGs, and then there's a way in Photoshop to add a folder full of JPEGs that are numbered in a sequence, and it'll turn them into frames in a video without you needing to do anything else. So that's actually surprisingly easy when I first did this. One thing that you can think about before shooting a time lapse is what your aspect ratio should be in the final video. So most still image cameras are shooting 3:2 ratio. But then most of the videos that you see on YouTube or wherever are going to be 16:9. So one thing you can think about is, does the composition that you've chosen actually work in a 16:9 crop? So of course you can make the video in a 3:2 crop, but and that'll work absolutely fine, but it's just kind of swimming against the flow of how most videos are shown. So if you want to be taking up the full real estate on a 1080p screen or a 4K screen or a HD TV, then 16:9 is the way to go. One practical thing that you need to take care of when you're shooting a time lapse is that your battery doesn't run out. So Depends on your camera, of course, and that kind of a thing, but 600 shots or 1200 shots or however many shots actually takes quite a lot of juice. You can use it in a much faster way than if you're walking around and occasionally taking a shot. So if you start with a full battery, you have a good chance that you're not going to get into trouble and lose the sequence in the middle of it. When it comes to actually shooting the pictures, then there are different ways that you can do that. So I use a Sony camera which has a built-in intervalometer in the camera menus, so I can tell it I want 600 pictures 3 seconds apart, for instance, and then I just press the shutter and away it goes. It keeps going until it's taken all the pictures. I think that there might be similar things in Canon and Nikon, but I'm not sure. I know that in other Sony cameras than the ones I have, there's an app which you can use to do the same thing. But no matter which camera you've got, there's a way to do it. So one other solution is to buy an intervalometer, which is a little bit like a remote trigger, except it gives you the possibility to tell in advance how many frames to shoot, but that's actually on the accessory, not on the camera, but exactly the same principle. Even if you don't have any of these, then just a remote trigger can be good enough in some cases. So if you're doing, for instance, an exposure of a second or so, then if you just set it on continuous shooting, then it'll keep going every second or every second or second and a half until it's done, without filling up the buffer in the camera. So depending on what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it, there's all different kind of ways. It won't work that well if you're just pushing the button manually yourself every 1 second or so, but maybe that's still possible. Hello everyone, I continuing my journey around Europe, following the biggest rain clouds in order to try and make sure I have the most miserable looking landscape photos.